Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, January 6, 2025, presumably, and that will make sense in a second. And today we're talking about relay cropping, how I would soup up a greenhouse, and the difference between being on-grid and off-grid in a storm. So let's do it. All right, good Monday to you all, or at least I assume it's Monday. I'm going to record this episode not knowing if the power and internet will be on for the rest of the morning for me to edit and upload it. Why? Well, we are in the middle of an epic ice storm here in the Mideastern US, and where I live is practically ground zero for it. For those who have not been in an ice storm, what happens is that the ice doesn't just fall out of the sky as ice. That would be horrifying. It's basically a very slow, drizzling rain that accumulates and freezes on everything from tree limbs to power lines. Your doors get frozen shut. Your gates get frozen shut. It's dangerous to walk on anything. Livestock are particularly vulnerable. So if the forecast ever says ice storm, find them some shelter if you can. But the point is that the ice is heavy and as such will topple tree limbs and power lines, meaning who knows if you will see this episode the day that I'm recording it. Sunday, I spent the day brushing rapidly accumulating snow off the tunnels in preparation for this ice storm. Later this morning, we are expecting more snow, which will result in even heavier ice as it accumulates, making a weird, heavy ice sandwich on everything. So if this goes up, I will be amazed. But also, there may or may not be a show tomorrow. Know that we're safe, though, just power and or internetless here. With that in mind, shouts to all the power workers out there in these conditions. Really appreciate you all. That is a difficult job. Since we moved to a new farm a few years back, almost all of our attention and capital has gone into the farm. We're just now starting to turn any amount of attention towards the actual house that we live in, but it's slow going because farms are big old babies like that. But I digress. We have goals or dreams of getting our current home to a much more resilient place where fears of having the power knocked out, potentially for many days in a row, doesn't concern us too much. Now, for the moment, we have neighbors and family who have ways for us to get out of the cold and all that good stuff, but we'd like to be somewhere people could rely on if their power goes out and turn our house into a place where neighbors and family can know we're good and for their own peace of mind. In fact, this reminded me of a story from back in 2014, maybe, somewhere around when our first son was born. Hannah and I were living off-grid in a small cabin in the woods deep in southern Kentucky, and we had a phone line, but nothing else. No running water, no electricity, no internet, none of that stuff. And we had just had our first child when we had a series of winter storms that left a ton of people out of power in that area. And I will never forget talking to my now late mother on the phone and telling her I was sorry that I couldn't call because the phone line was out and that I bet she was worried about us. And she laughed and said, I wasn't worried about you all. You all have everything you need. I was calling my friends and I figured you all were fine. And honestly, she was kind of right. We were completely fine. We made our own heat in the wood stove and got our water and basically just hung out and enjoyed the snow. We read books. We played with baby. It was fine. What I liked about that time, not just was that we were resilient for ourselves, but in theory, we could have been helpful to other people in the way that our neighbors are now helpful to us. Of course, for as nice as it was to not be dependent on any sort of grid, if something bad had happened at that time, if I'd gotten injured or the kid got sick or whatever, we were pretty SOL. We were an hour drive from basically anything, and very few neighbors lived around us. We had amazing neighbors, to be sure, who would have done anything and would have happily helped. It was just harder to get to them. And anyway, I think the idea of self-reliance, of self-sufficiency often gets way too much credit, as I've said before, and sold as this you versus the world idea to take care of yourself. But also, in fairness, especially when our more resilient neighbors and family are offering a warm place to stay should things get really bad, it's easy to see how some amount of self-resilience can be a community act. Anyway, I don't know if that's a complete thought, but that's the idea that's swirling around in my head this morning. We're inspired to make our residents maybe more resilient to ease the stress on us and potentially our community, and certainly our family. Anyway, don't know if that's interesting, but we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk somewhat poignantly about high tunnels. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Harnwah Greenhouses. Arnois Greenhouses has pioneered controlled environment agriculture since 1965, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their unwavering mission is to support growers' success through innovation and expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Arnois Greenhouses are engineered to withstand high wind and snow loads, providing optimal brightness, increased yields, rapid ROI, and long-lasting durability. With over 20,000 projects completed, they are more than a manufacturer. They are a trusted partner. Their structures foster sustainable, energy-efficient ecosystems that drive profitable, resilient agriculture. In 2025, Arnois is introducing a new low-tech, high-tunnel model starting at just $2 per square foot, offering open field growers an accessible entry into controlled environment agriculture. Arnois Greenhouses, leading the way in turnkey solutions for local growers. Learn more at arnois.com. That's HARNOIS.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/notillgrowers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere questions come in, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Dwayne T, who writes, quote, "Hello, Farmer Jesse. I love everything you do for this community. Your videos turn me into a market gardener." Awesome. Dwayne, thanks. I'm looking into getting a high tunnel for the coming growing season. I am in Zone 7A right outside of St. Louis, Missouri. I heard you talk a while back on how the ridge vent is a must. Is there any must-haves? Looking to go down the buy once, cry once route, LOL. Thanks. End quote. Okay, fun question. Also, St. Louis is supposedly a really good soccer city, so shouts to that as well. Okay, so I'm treating this somewhat like a thought experiment that I've not done. Like, if I had my druthers, what all would I want for my tunnel? All right, so first, let's assume that money is at least somewhat of an obstacle here, because obviously we would all take a fully automated tunnel built on some sort of climate battery with solar heating or whatever. But let's say I have a relatively normal high tunnel budget, but can spend $10 or $20 extra $1,000 to really get it right. Where would that money go? First, I love my ridge vent, and I would have to say I would miss it if it didn't exist on my tunnel. So for me, that's kind of a must. Though maybe I'm just a little bit spoiled. It just really, really helps in the summer at cooling the tunnel off. And when you open it up, it kind of just turns the tunnel into somewhat of a shade house. For the uninitiated, a ridge vent is a mechanism at the top of the tunnel, like goes straight down the long ways down your tunnel, that you can open and close to moderate temperature and release stagnant air. It literally like splits the plastic in half and it lets the air out the top. I want to say ours was like roughly $9,000 or so extra dollars, so that would eat up a healthy chunk of that budget. But it is a luxury I absolutely love. Before that, though, I would probably put time and money into the site preparation and drainage. Tunnels for me have always been something I have somewhat thrown together in the season to get ready for the fall and winter production, which is dumb, and I always regret it. If you can, level the site, get the drainage figured out, and then build it. Get electric out there too if you at all think you'll need it. Get irrigation lines buried and ready for the tunnel before it goes up if you can, so you're not having to deal with that afterwards, like putting stuff underneath of the metal structure. As for the structure itself, you definitely should get wind bracing and good hip boards. At least that's what I would do. I really like having the trusses that go perpendicular to the structure as well, just to help the support at the top. Investing in polycarbonate to bury beneath the baseboards for weed and rodent protection is something I've seen more and more growers doing, and that makes sense to me, though you could also, or alternatively, invest in gopher wire to help keep them from getting in if that's an issue in your area. I like having good, strong polycarbonate end walls with the sliding door, just making sure it's wide enough to get your equipment in and out. Alternative to, or perhaps in conjunction with the ridge vent, you should still think about ventilation. You could get a shutter, like one of those shutters that opens and closes for the end walls. That helps release heat on hot days. If you have electricity at the site, there are also things like shutters and fans that you can use to really move the air in and out. What's nice about that is the ridge vent, for instance, is passive, but the fans are actively moving and guaranteeing the airflow in a better way, more consistent way. Like a significant number of your diseases are going to come from poor airflow. As for a furnace or some way of heating, you have to really be dedicated to maximizing production to go that route, because every penny is going to matter with that much financial input. Like you're talking thousands of dollars a year in natural gas. Like, can you make up for that in your sales enough to make it profitable? That can be tough. but this may also depend on your climate. Here in Zone 6B, we can get away with more passive heating options than someone up north, so it's worth exploring what new technology is out there. Call one of our high tunnel sponsors and see what they say. That will look very good on me, so make sure to tell them I said hi, of course. Also, I don't want to disappoint anyone by not talking more about climate batteries, which are basically systems that are built under your tunnel where fans push the warm air from the tunnel underneath the ground into tubing and effectively store it there to be released when the temperatures drop. Very cool idea, and it has been tested and proved in many different ways. I promise more exploration of this particular idea in the future, but I just saw that Threefold Farm in Pennsylvania recently put up a 30-minute video detailing theirs. If you like more info just right away, I watched that this weekend and I was just blown away. I loved it. These climate batteries are not for everyone, but it is definitely worth looking into. I'll link that in the show notes so you can get a jump on it. Very interesting stuff and good for them for making such a nice detailed video. Shouts to that. Now, last thing is like the skin or the covering. For that, I've only ever used a single sheet of poly, and in my climate, for most of my needs, that's pretty much fine. If I were further north, I would consider double poly, but you'll need to be able to install a blower to keep the two layers apart. The nice thing is that the second layer not only helps insulate the tunnel, but stabilize the tunnel as well. It just makes it more rigid and thus more stable. There's also something called Solar Wrap that basically looks like bubble wrap, and although I've never tried it myself, I don't have it on any of our tunnels. I know a few growers who do love it. Some things to consider, though, is that it adds a significant expense, and the tunnel has to be built with extreme precision so each segment can fit the bows. Like, it's not like one giant skin you just throw over top. It's literally like 4 or 5 foot sections that you slide up into a specific mechanism that keeps it locked in place. But the idea is that it will outlast regular poly, and if one section gets slashed by a zealous 3-year-old, voice of experience here, you do not have to replace the whole skin. Again, voice of experience here. You just would have to replace that one section. Really investigate that, though. I'm not sure how much your light transmission changes over the years, so although they say it will last 20 years or more, that's what the light transmission would be by year 20. I don't know. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. New tech pops up every year, and I just think making sure that you're not building something more than what you can pay for, especially when it comes to heating, is an important factor. Like, if it's going to cost you more money than that tunnel will make in profit over the next, 20 years, then maybe it's worth rethinking that design or potentially rethinking what you're going to put in there. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Up next, let's talk about relay cropping, sometimes in tunnels. Be right back.
Is it time to talk things over? You can't get any colder. I've tried to warm things up without any luck.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Peaceful Heritage Nursery. If you're looking for hardy and resilient fruit trees, berry plants, or pawpaw trees, then check out Peaceful Heritage Nursery. Peaceful Heritage Nursery LLC is a mail-order nursery shipping premium quality fruit trees and berry plants across the USA. They specialize in resilient, non-GMO plant genetics for small growers. Their diverse selection includes berries, cold hardy figs, passion fruit, gumi, mulberry, and much more. They're famous for their diverse selection of premium quality grafted pawpaw trees. 5-star Google ratings and customer testimonials attest to their commitment to excellence in quality and service. Find them at peacefulheritage.com and join their mailing list. Once again, find them at peacefulheritage.com. Use the promo code NOTILL, all caps, one word, for 10% off your first order. All right, back to the show. All right, so I am still catching up on questions from November's show thread on the Patreon page, but I'm almost there, I think. So anyway, let's take another question from that group and keep rolling along with that. Today's second Patreon question comes from Patreon member Joe Naaman Sessions, who asks, quote, I know you have mentioned it elsewhere, but not sure if you have given deep dive into your successes in intercropping and relay planting other than a parade of green onions. I'd love to learn how to get a jump on bed flips for things that are removed entirely or to a stage where they won't regrow. Examples, beets, carrots, head lettuce, etc. What particular varieties have you had success with, both predecessor and successor crops? End quote. Okay, so fun question, Joe. And to just kind of give the listener an idea of what a relay crop is, basically you plant one crop into an existing crop before that crop is out of the ground. It's like a relay race. but like with vegetation. And there are only a couple ways that I actively use this idea now, but there are no doubt other ways it could be employed. And I know larger scale growers are playing around with relaying corn or beans into wheat or something before it's harvested and stuff like that. Now, one thing is I want to emphasize, if you try something like this, just try it on a small scale first. I say this all the time, but I will discuss a weird experiment I'm doing on this channel or somewhere, just something I'm working on that I haven't fully fleshed out yet. And invariably, someone in the comments will say, oh, cool, I'm going to try that next year for my crop. One fact about my farm is that I just try a bunch of weird things here so that you don't have to. It's fun for me, but also No-Till Growers provides me a small financial buffer to goof around and experiment, because for every 10 things that I try, maybe only 1 or 2 is really a success enough to use, but maybe it's a massive success. So anyway, just be smart and start small on any trial you're running, even if it is just one that has worked for me, especially if we're talking about your livelihood. But also don't be afraid to play and have fun. What's the point of doing any of this if you can't have a little fun in the garden? But more on the psychological importance of fun later. For now, relay cropping. So there are 2 main ways I still employ relay cropping regularly on my farm, at least with cash crops. I still will relay in cover crops towards the end of the season a lot. Like I will sow things like crimson clover into lots of different stuff because it germinates so well kind of at the surface. Or I will intersow peas, oats, winter rye and vetch into lettuces and those sorts of things just right before they're terminated by the cold. But for crops, there's only a few that I really use regularly. First is one I've talked about already a couple times, which is the sowing of carrots in the tunnel in January, like I will be doing later this week, hopefully, leaving space in the middle to plant my tomatoes. Though this year I'm not going to be planting tomatoes into that bed. I'm going to be planting cucumbers, but I'm not going to be relaying the cucumbers in because I want to push the cucumber planting back. But anyway, I will leave that space in the middle, and then in April, I will transplant the tomatoes directly into the tall carrots. The next week, the carrots start to come out and the tomatoes slowly take over the bed. I also do that with our early radish plantings in the field. Radishes are sown in early March in the field and covered. Space is left in the middle for summer squash, which is transplanted in mid to late April, depending on the weather, right into the radishes being harvested, and then it's recovered just for warmth. I've had successes with some other things, but they were a little wonkier and less predictable, like squash into carrots. It worked, but again, wonkily, and I've tried it several times where it worked and a few times where it didn't, and it just wasn't consistent. Though that early carrot planting is ripe for ideas like this. Same with radishes. In fact, if you know you're going to be planting tomatoes down the middle of a bed, those sides are generally fair game for beets, green onions, carrots, lettuce, arugula, radishes, any of that stuff. Tomatoes and peppers are easygoing crops for the most part and generally tolerant of my whims, but they are also slow growing, so they tend to waste the space around them, which is why I am often shoving at least one other crop in there just to get the most out of that area before, the tomatoes or peppers or whatever take over, especially on 4-foot beds where there's a lot of wasted space on tomatoes and peppers. 30-inch beds can be a bit more complicated because you're just kind of squeezed, but we often put an extra row of something even when we were on 30-inch beds because we could fit, even if it was just a row of lettuce. That meant at least a little extra something profit off those beds. As for other crops, garlic is not one I would mess with interplanting. Ditto bulb onions. Those are crops that don't do well under heavy competition, though green onions almost benefit because they often elongate more when in heavy competition. Corn is okay as an interplant. Okra too. Okra is a nice one for interplanting in terms of raising the profitability of that bed. You could get a high value radish or turnip crop, interplant the okra, and then suddenly that bed has significantly more value than it would if it had solely been okra for 3 months. Love okra dearly, but it is not super profitable. One of the biggest factors in success, though, is weed management. You cannot do anything like this if you do not have good weed management. It just will be a mess. Compost mulches in particular make it easier, but no matter what approach, if you're seeing a weed issue coming, don't bother with relaying a crop in there. It will be a nightmare. Anyway, maybe I answered the question there, Joe. I hope so. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up there. Huge shout to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No-Till Growers. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook over at notillgrowers.com or The Seed Farmer by Dan Brisebois to help support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Krista, Nate McBride, Mick Hegarty, Chick on a Farm, and Peter Mallon. So this group is this is just a small group that was at a national park tour guide conference in Yellowstone. And anyway, something apocalyptic happens, of course, and they all have to find their way back to the nearest city, which in this case, it happens they have to go to Denver. I don't know why, Denver, but they have to get to Denver. And their knowledge of Yellowstone and of the national parks in general really works to their advantage, but they also can't help themselves but give actual tours as they go along, and it really slows the project down, and I think it makes it difficult on them. But again, don't want to spoil the ending, but it's a beautiful, adventurous novel filled with a lot of nerdy information. Yep. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow, maybe. Shout out to Ice Storms, I guess. Thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you later. Later is probably good. All right.